Marcus Johnson had always been a man of few words, but big dreams. A self-made real estate investor with a knack for spotting hidden potential, he'd spent years quietly building his empire one property at a time. When he first arrived in the suburban neighborhood known as Willow Creek, no one paid him much attention. The area was famous for its perfectly trimmed lawns, white picket fences, and residents who prided themselves on keeping things just so. It was the kind of place where people cared deeply about appearances and rules. Marcus's new home stood out like a sore thumb. Nestled on the corner lot of Maple Street, it was an old house with peeling paint, overgrown bushes, and a sagging front porch. To the neighbors, it looked like a relic from another era, completely out of sync with the polished charm of the rest of the street. But to Marcus, it was a diamond in the rough, a project waiting to happen. He saw possibilities where others saw problems. This wasn't just any house. It was part of his larger plan to revitalize the entire neighborhood. From day one, Marcus kept to himself. He didn't attend block parties or join the local gardening club. Instead, he spent his days inspecting properties, meeting with contractors, and making quiet purchases under different company names. Over time, Marcus acquired several homes in Willow Creek, often buying them from owners eager to sell due to rising taxes or maintenance costs. He rented some out, renovated others, and let a few sit empty while he figured out their best use. All the while, he remained invisible, avoiding drawing attention to himself or his growing influence in the community. But Marcus's low profile only made his neighbors more curious and suspicious. Who was this man who never seemed to care about fitting in? Why did he ignore the carefully crafted guidelines set by the Homeowners Association, HOA, which dictated everything from mailbox colors to acceptable holiday decorations? In a neighborhood that thrived on conformity, Marcus's indifference stood out like a red flag. The HOA board, led by Linda Harper, wasted no time addressing what they saw as a problem. Linda was a force to be reckoned with, meticulous, opinionated, and fiercely protective of Willow Creek's pristine image. She sent Marcus polite but firm letters reminding him of the rules. Trim the bushes, fix the fence, repaint the siding. Each letter went unanswered, piling up unopened on Marcus's kitchen counter. For him, these demands were irrelevant distractions from his bigger plans. As weeks turned into months, whispers spread among the residents. Some dismissed Marcus as lazy or disrespectful. Others speculated that he might be struggling financially, unable to afford the upkeep. No one imagined the truth. Beneath his quiet demeanor lay a shrewd businessman who already owned far more of the neighborhood than anyone realized. And soon, those same neighbors would learn just how wrong they'd been to underestimate him. Little did they know, Marcus wasn't just another homeowner trying to blend in. He was playing a much longer game, one that would change Willow Creek forever. By the end of the year, Willow Creek was almost unrecognizable from the neighborhood it had been just months earlier. The streets buzzed with life, filled with laughter, music, and the hum of progress. Vibrant murals adorned walls that were once plain and dull, each painting telling a story of resilience, hope, and unity. Solar panels gleamed on rooftops, powering homes more efficiently and sustainably. Parks bustled with activity. Children played on swings, teenagers shot hoops on freshly paved courts, and families gathered for picnics under shady trees. Even the air seemed lighter, charged with a sense of possibility. Marcus Johnson walked through the neighborhood one crisp autumn evening, taking it all in. He passed by the community garden he'd helped establish, where residents tended to rows of vegetables and flowers. Nearby, a group of kids laughed as they chased each other around a playground that hadn't existed a year ago. On the corner, a new cafe owned by a young couple from the neighborhood served coffee and pastries, its windows decorated with hand-painted designs celebrating local artistry. Everywhere Marcus looked, he saw evidence of growth, not just in buildings or infrastructure, but in people's lives. The resistance that had once simmered beneath the surface had largely faded. Linda Harper, who had led the opposition, now volunteered at the community center Marcus had renovated. She still teased him occasionally about his grand plans, but there was warmth in her tone, a sign that even she had come to respect what he'd accomplished. Other former critics joined forces with Marcus, working together to organize events like block parties, holiday parades, and workshops for aspiring entrepreneurs. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, but it was becoming something better. A place where differences didn't divide but enriched. As Marcus strolled down Maple Street, he noticed Margaret sitting on her porch, knitting a scarf. She waved when she saw him and called out, "Come sit for a minute." He obliged, settling into a chair beside her. They talked about the upcoming winter festival, an idea born from one of their late-night conversations. It would feature ice skating, carol singing, and a market showcasing local crafts and food. "You've done good work here, Marcus," Margaret said softly, her eyes twinkling. "This neighborhood needed someone like you." Her words caught him off guard, not because they were unexpected, but because they carried so much weight. For years, Marcus had worked tirelessly to prove himself, to show the world, and sometimes himself, that he belonged. But hearing those simple words from someone who had once doubted him felt like validation in its purest form. Later that night, as Marcus stood on his own porch looking out at the quiet street, he thought about how far Willow Creek, and he himself, had come. This wasn't just a neighborhood anymore. It was a second family. A patchwork of stories, struggles, and triumphs woven together by shared experiences. And while Marcus had started this journey with grand ambitions, he realized now that the true reward wasn't in the changes he'd made. It was in the connections he'd forged along the way. Willow Creek had taught him that transformation wasn't about erasing the past but building upon it. It was about listening, learning, and finding strength in diversity. As the wind rustled through the trees and the distant glow of porch lights dotted the horizon, Marcus smiled. He had set out to change a neighborhood, but in doing so, the neighborhood had changed him too. And as he stepped inside, closing the door behind him, he knew the story of Willow Creek wasn't over. It was still being written, one chapter at a time. The morning sun had barely risen when Marcus Johnson was jolted awake by the deafening roar of heavy machinery outside his home. At first, he thought it might be construction work on a nearby street, a common enough occurrence in any neighborhood. But as he pulled back the curtains and peered out, his heart sank. A bulldozer was tearing through his front porch, ripping apart wooden beams and scattering debris across his lawn. Workers in bright orange vests moved with grim efficiency, dismantling the very structure Marcus had planned to restore as part of his vision for the house. Stunned and furious, Marcus threw on a pair of jeans and stormed outside. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the noise of grinding metal and splintering wood. The workers paused, turning to look at him with expressions that ranged from confusion to indifference. One of them stepped forward, holding out a clipboard. "Court order," he said simply, shoving a piece of paper into Marcus's hands before returning to the task at hand. Marcus stared at the document, his mind racing. It was an official court order issued by the HOA, authorizing the demolition of his porch, due to alleged safety violations. The legal jargon blurred together as anger surged through him. How could this have happened without his knowledge? Hadn't he been given a chance to defend himself? More importantly, who did these people think they were, barging onto his property and destroying his home? He tried to intervene, shouting at the workers to stop, but they ignored him, their focus unwavering. Neighbors began to gather on the sidewalk, drawn by the commotion. Some watched silently, while others whispered among themselves. Linda Harper, standing near the edge of the crowd with her arms crossed, wore a smug expression. To her, this was justice served, a necessary step to preserve the integrity of the neighborhood. She didn't notice the fire burning in Marcus's eyes, or the way his jaw clenched as he took in the scene. As the bulldozer reduced his porch to rubble, Marcus retreated inside, his mind working overtime. He knew this wasn't just about a dilapidated porch. It was a power play. The HOA had underestimated him. Assuming he was just another homeowner, they could intimidate into compliance. What they didn't realize was that Marcus had spent years preparing for moments like this, moments when people would try to push him around. And now, they had handed him the perfect opportunity to strike back. Later that day, after the workers had left and the dust settled, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, staring at the pile of unopened HOA letters. For months, he had ignored them, confident that his plans were too big for anyone to interfere with. But now, he saw how wrong he had been. The HOA wasn't just a nuisance, it was a threat. And threats, Marcus knew, required decisive action. That evening, he made a series of phone calls. First, he contacted his attorney, instructing them to file a lawsuit against the HOA for damages and trespassing. Then, he reached out to a private investigator, asking them to dig up everything they could find about the HOA board members, their financial records, property holdings, and personal histories. Finally, he sent an email to his team of real estate agents, requesting a full audit of his ownership stakes in Willow Creek. By the time he hung up the phone, Marcus felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The HOA thought they had won by tearing down his porch. But what they didn't know was that they had awakened a sleeping giant. Marcus wasn't just a resident of Willow Creek. He was its largest landlord, its silent architect, and soon, its most powerful player. As he gazed out at the wreckage of his porch, now bathed in the golden light of sunset, Marcus allowed himself a small, knowing smile. They had made a critical mistake underestimating him. And soon, the entire neighborhood would pay the price for it. As the dust settled and Willow Creek began to thrive under Marcus Johnson's leadership, he found himself with rare moments of quiet reflection. Late at night, when the hum of the neighborhood faded into silence, Marcus would sit on the back steps of his home, a cup of coffee in hand, and think about how far he'd come. This place, once a symbol of exclusion and rigid conformity, had become something entirely different. It was no longer just a collection of houses. It was starting to feel like a community. But Marcus knew the journey hadn't been easy, for him or for the people around him. He thought often about why he had chosen Willow Creek in the first place. Years ago, as a young real estate investor, he'd faced discrimination here. Banks refused him loans, neighbors whispered behind his back, and landlords turned him away simply because of the color of his skin. Back then, Willow Creek represented everything he resented: privilege disguised as perfection, rules designed to keep people like him out. Yet, despite all that, he saw potential in its streets and stories waiting to be rewritten. Now, sitting in the very neighborhood that once rejected him, Marcus felt a strange sense of gratitude. Those early struggles had shaped him, not just as a businessman, but as a person. They taught him resilience, patience, and the importance of seeing beyond surface-level appearances. And now, he was using those lessons to reshape Willow Creek into a place where everyone could belong, regardless of their background or bank account. Late-night conversations with longtime residents deepened his connection to the neighborhood. Margaret, the elderly woman who had initially opposed his changes, became one of his closest confidants. Over cups of tea, she shared stories about Willow Creek's history, the families who had lived there for generations, the traditions passed down through decades, the pride people took in calling it home. These stories reminded Marcus that while progress was important, so too was preserving what made the neighborhood unique. At the same time, Marcus couldn't ignore the mixed emotions still lingering beneath the surface. Some residents, though outwardly supportive, admitted privately that they struggled to reconcile the new Willow Creek with the old. "It feels like we're losing part of ourselves," one neighbor confessed during a casual chat. Marcus nodded, understanding the sentiment. Change always carried a tinge of loss, even when it led to something better. His goal wasn't to erase the past, but to build upon it, to honor the memories while creating space for new ones. One evening, during a community dinner held in the park, Marcus stood up to speak. The crowd fell silent as he looked around at the faces gathered before him. Young and old, black and white, newcomers and lifelong residents. "When I first came here," he began, I didn't expect to stay long. But over time, I realized this neighborhood isn't just a place. It's a story. A story of challenges overcome, of dreams pursued, of lives intertwined. He paused, letting his words sink in. My hope is that together, we can write the next chapter of that story. Not by forgetting where we've been, but by deciding where we want to go. This isn't my neighborhood. It's ours. And I believe we can make it something truly special. Applause erupted, spontaneous and heartfelt. As Marcus returned to his seat, he noticed tears in Margaret's eyes and smiles on faces he'd once seen filled with doubt. In that moment, he felt a profound sense of belonging, not because he owned so much of Willow Creek, but because he finally felt like a part of it. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, and Marcus knew there would still be challenges to face. But for the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future where Willow Creek wasn't defined by its divisions, but by its unity. It was a vision worth fighting for, and Marcus was ready to see it through. The tension between Marcus Johnson and the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, HOA, grew thicker with each passing week. Linda Harper, the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood's perfection, was losing patience. She had built her reputation on enforcing rules that kept Willow Creek looking like a postcard, and Marcus's blatant disregard for those rules was like a crack in an otherwise flawless mirror. To her, his unkempt house wasn't just an eyesore. It was a threat to the entire community's harmony. Linda wasn't alone in her frustration. The HOA board met regularly to discuss what they called the Marcus problem. At first, their tone was measured, almost sympathetic. Maybe he didn't understand how things worked here. Perhaps he needed a little guidance. But as Marcus continued to ignore their letters, emails, and even door-to-door visits, their patience wore thin. They began to see him not as a neighbor, but as a challenge, one they were determined to win. The warnings escalated quickly. What started as polite reminders about overgrown bushes and chipped paint soon turned into official notices filled with legal jargon. Failure to comply will result in further action, read one letter, delivered by certified mail. Another warned of fines if Marcus didn't repaint his front door within 30 days. Each document landed neatly in Marcus's mailbox, only to be tossed onto the growing stack of unopened envelopes on his kitchen counter. For Marcus, these demands were nothing more than background noise. He had bigger priorities, like finalizing the purchase of 2 more homes on Oak Lane or meeting with architects to draft plans for a community center he envisioned building someday. The HOA's obsession with trivial details seemed absurd to him. Did it really matter if his mailbox was beige instead of white? Was anyone's life truly better because all the houses looked identical? But while Marcus shrugged off the HOA's complaints, his neighbors weren't so quick to let it go. Gossip spread faster than wildfire in Willow Creek, and Marcus became a frequent topic of conversation at dinner tables and coffee shops. Some residents speculated that he was lazy or stubborn. Others accused him of being disrespectful, intentionally flouting the rules to make a point. A few even suggested darker motives, that he might be trying to lower property values so he could swoop in and buy up more homes at bargain prices. What no one suspected was the truth. Marcus already owned far more of the neighborhood than anyone realized. Under various LLC names, he had quietly purchased dozens of properties, including several rented out to families who thought they were dealing with separate landlords. His corner lot house was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, a puzzle that would eventually reshape Willow Creek entirely. As the HOA ratcheted up the pressure, Linda decided it was time to take drastic measures. She hired a lawyer to draft a formal complaint against Marcus, citing violations of safety codes and aesthetic standards. With a court order in hand, she authorized contractors to address the issues themselves, even if it meant stepping onto Marcus's property without his permission. After all, she reasoned, they were doing this for the good of the community. How could he argue with that? What Linda and the rest of the HOA failed to realize was that their actions were about to backfire spectacularly. By targeting Marcus's home, they were picking a fight with someone who held far more power than they could imagine. And when the bulldozer arrived on Marcus's lawn one fateful morning, tearing down his porch before he could stop them, they unknowingly set off a chain reaction that would change everything for everyone. Unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface, the HOA congratulated itself on finally taking a stand. But as Marcus stood silently watching the destruction unfold, a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. They had made a grave mistake, and soon the entire neighborhood would find out why. The emergency HOA meeting was called within days of the bulldozer incident, and the small community center buzzed with tension. Residents filed in, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. Word had spread quickly about Marcus's lawsuit against the HOA, and everyone wanted answers. Linda Harper stood at the front of the room, clipboard in hand, ready to defend her actions. She had expected an angry homeowner demanding an apology or compensation, but what happened next left her speechless. Marcus walked into the room calmly, dressed in a sharp suit that commanded attention. His presence alone seemed to shift the energy in the space. He didn't sit down with the other residents. Instead, he took a position near the podium, his posture confident and deliberate. When Linda began speaking, trying to explain the unfortunate misunderstanding and justify the demolition, Marcus raised a hand to interrupt her. "Before we go any further," he said, his voice steady but carrying an edge of authority, "there's something you all need to know." With that, he pulled out a thick folder filled with documents and placed it on the table in front of him. The room fell silent as Marcus opened the folder and began laying out papers one by one. "I've been quietly purchasing properties in this neighborhood for years," he explained, his tone measured but firm. "Not just my own home, but dozens of others. In fact, I own more than half the houses here, including several rented out to families who may not even realize they're paying me." Gasps rippled through the crowd as neighbors exchanged shocked glances. Some leaned forward, straining to see the papers Marcus held up for display. But he wasn't done yet. "And let's not forget," he added, pulling out another document, "that I also own the building where this very meeting is taking place." The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Linda's face turned pale as she processed the implications. Her carefully constructed authority over Willow Creek was crumbling right before her eyes. As murmurs erupted around the room, Marcus continued, addressing both the HOA board and the wider audience. "You thought I was just some guy ignoring your rules because I didn't care. But the truth is, I've been working behind the scenes to transform this neighborhood, not tear it apart. Every property I've bought has been part of a larger plan to revitalize Willow Creek, to make it better for everyone." He paused, letting his words sink in. "When you sent contractors to destroy my porch, you weren't dealing with just another homeowner. You were attacking someone who holds significant influence over this community. And now, I'm stepping forward to take control, not out of revenge, but because it's time for change." The room was electric with emotion. Some residents looked embarrassed, realizing how unfairly they judged Marcus. Others appeared defensive, unwilling to accept that their power dynamics had shifted so dramatically. A few clapped hesitantly, sensing that Marcus might actually have the neighborhood's best interests at heart. Linda tried to regain composure, stammering something about due process and legal rights, but her arguments sounded hollow. Even members of the HOA board exchanged uneasy glances, unsure how to respond to the bombshell Marcus had dropped. For the first time, they saw themselves not as rulers of Willow Creek, but as players in a game they hadn't fully understood. By the end of the meeting, Marcus had made his point crystal clear. The old way of doing things was over. He announced plans to dissolve the current HOA board and replace it with a new leadership structure, one focused on progress rather than pettiness. As people filed out of the room, whispers filled the air. Some were angry, others intrigued, but all agreed on one thing: Willow Creek would never be the same again. For Marcus, the moment felt like vindication. He hadn't sought conflict, but now that it had come to him, he was ready to seize the opportunity. The neighborhood he loved was finally within reach, and this time, No one would stand in his way. Resistance to Marcus Johnson's leadership didn't disappear overnight. Though many residents embraced the positive changes sweeping through Willow Creek, a small but determined faction continued to push back against his vision. Led by Linda Harper, this group refused to let go of the old ways, clinging to what they saw as the neighborhood's core identity. They filed lawsuits, circulated petitions, and even organized protests outside the newly renovated community center. Their message was clear. Marcus might own much of Willow Creek, but he couldn't force everyone to fall in line. At first, the backlash frustrated Marcus. He had poured his time, energy, and resources into transforming the neighborhood, yet some people still viewed him as an outsider trying to impose his will. Late at night, sitting alone in his study, he sometimes wondered if it was all worth it. But then he'd step outside and see kids laughing on the freshly painted playground equipment, or hear neighbors chatting warmly under the new solar-powered streetlights, and he'd remember why he started this journey in the first place. Change wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Determined to bridge the divide, Marcus decided to take a different approach. Instead of focusing solely on grand projects, he began reaching out to individual residents, especially those who opposed him. He invited them to coffee, listened to their concerns, and asked for their input. One evening, he sat down with Linda herself, surprising her with a calm demeanor and genuine curiosity about her perspective. "I don't expect you to agree with everything I'm doing," Marcus told her, "but I do want to understand where you're coming from." Linda was skeptical at first, assuming it was just another PR stunt. But as their conversation unfolded, she realized Marcus wasn't dismissing her fears. He was genuinely trying to find common ground. By the end of the meeting, they hadn't resolved all their differences, but something shifted between them. For the first time, Linda saw Marcus not as an adversary, but as someone willing to listen. This personal touch proved transformative. Slowly, more residents began warming up to Marcus's ideas. Some credited his willingness to engage. Others were won over by tangible results. When Marcus launched a scholarship program for local students, funded by proceeds from his rental properties, even his harshest critics had to admit it was a meaningful contribution to the community. The same went for his initiative to support minority-owned businesses, turning empty storefronts into thriving hubs of entrepreneurship. Still, there were moments when tensions flared. During one heated town hall meeting, a longtime resident accused Marcus of prioritizing flashy projects over practical needs. "What good are solar panels if my sink is leaking?" the man shouted, drawing murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Marcus didn't shy away from the criticism. Instead, he acknowledged the issue publicly and promised immediate action. Within days, plumbers were dispatched to fix the problem, along with similar issues reported by other households. It was a small gesture, but it demonstrated Marcus's commitment to accountability. As months passed, the resistance softened. Even Linda stopped attending protest rallies, though she remained vocal about preserving certain traditions. Marcus respected her stance, recognizing that growth required compromise. He worked with her and others to incorporate elements of the old Willow Creek into his plans. For example, hosting annual block parties that celebrated the neighborhood's history while showcasing its future potential. By the end of the year, the atmosphere in Willow Creek had shifted dramatically. What had once been a battleground of opposing ideals became a laboratory for collaboration. Residents who once distrusted Marcus now sought his advice on everything from home repairs to career opportunities. Kids waved at him as he walked down the street, calling him Mr. Marcus. And though some scars from the past remained, the neighborhood felt united in a way it never had before. For Marcus, the resistance had been a test, a chance to prove that his intentions were rooted in goodwill rather than greed. Through patience, humility, and relentless effort, he had turned adversaries into allies and skeptics into supporters. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, but it was moving in the right direction. And for Marcus, that was enough. With the truth about his ownership stakes now out in the open, Marcus wasted no time asserting his authority over Willow Creek. The old HOA board was officially dissolved within days, their power stripped away as swiftly as it had been revealed to be built on shaky ground. In its place, Marcus introduced a new leadership structure, one that prioritized innovation, inclusivity, and real progress over trivial rules and superficial perfection. His first order of business was abolishing the petty regulations that had long defined life in Willow Creek. No more nitpicking about mailbox colors, holiday decorations, or lawn lengths. Instead, Marcus focused on policies that mattered: improving infrastructure, reducing energy costs, and fostering a sense of community. He announced plans to install solar panels on every home he owned, offering incentives for other residents to do the same. Parks that had fallen into disrepair were given fresh coats of paint, new playground equipment, and vibrant flower beds. For the first time in years, Willow Creek began to feel alive. Not just picture-perfect, but genuinely welcoming. But not everyone welcomed these changes with open arms. A small but vocal group of residents, led by none other than Linda Harper, resisted Marcus's vision. They accused him of using his wealth and influence to manipulate the neighborhood, claiming his actions undermined the spirit of democracy. "This isn't transformation, it's takeover," Linda declared at a heated town hall meeting. Her words resonated with some, particularly those who feared losing the tight-knit charm they believed made Willow Creek special. Marcus listened patiently to their concerns, never raising his voice or showing frustration. When it was his turn to speak, he addressed the crowd with calm conviction. "I understand your fears," he said. "Change can be uncomfortable, especially when it comes quickly. But ask yourselves this: are we holding on to these rules because they truly benefit us, or because they give us a false sense of control?" He went on to explain how his initiatives would directly improve lives. Solar panels would lower electricity bills. Revitalized parks would create safer spaces for children to play. Affordable housing projects would attract diverse families, enriching the fabric of the community. Slowly but surely, even some of his critics began to see the value in his approach. To win over the skeptics, Marcus took a hands-on approach. He attended block parties, knocked on doors, and invited neighbors to share their ideas for improving Willow Creek. One evening, during a casual gathering at the newly renovated park, an elderly woman named Margaret approached him. She had initially opposed Marcus's changes, fearing they would erase the neighborhood's character. But after seeing the positive impact firsthand, she admitted, "You've done more in a few months than the HOA did in years." Still, resistance lingered. Linda and her allies filed legal challenges, arguing that Marcus's sweeping reforms violated zoning laws and property rights. While these efforts delayed some projects, they ultimately failed to halt the momentum Marcus had created. His transparency and willingness to engage with residents earned him widespread support, even from former detractors. Over time, the opposition dwindled, leaving only a stubborn few clinging to the past. As the neighborhood transformed, so did its reputation. News of Marcus's innovative leadership spread beyond Willow Creek, drawing attention from local media and community organizations. Articles praised his commitment to sustainability and social responsibility, portraying him not as a power-hungry landlord, but as a visionary determined to uplift those around him. Awards followed, further cementing his status as a force for good. Yet despite the accolades, Marcus remained grounded. He knew the work wasn't finished. Willow Creek still faced challenges: economic disparities, aging infrastructure, and lingering divisions, but he was committed to tackling them head-on. Each victory, no matter how small, brought him closer to realizing his dream: a neighborhood where everyone felt valued and empowered. For the first time in years, Willow Creek wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. And while the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, one thing was certain: Marcus Johnson had turned adversity into opportunity, proving that true leadership isn't about control, it's about creating something better for everyone.